My name is Caroline, and for most of my life, I believed that every problem had a solution that could be found on a spreadsheet. It's a worldview that served me well. As a forensic accountant, I made my living finding the truth hidden in plain sight, buried beneath columns of fabricated numbers and plausible lies. My world was one of balance sheets and audit trails, a place where logic reigned and every discrepancy, no matter how small, was a loose thread that could unravel a grand deception. I brought that same meticulous energy to my home life, believing I had built it on the most stable of foundations. My home was a reflection of my mind, modern, minimalist, with clean lines and an absence of clutter. Everything had its place. My husband, Thomas, a high school history teacher, often joked that I was the only person who could find romance in a well-diversified portfolio. He was the dreamer to my pragmatist, a man who saw the world in sweeping narratives of empires and revolutions. Well, I saw it in the stark, undeniable clarity of numbers. He was a wonderful father, the kind who would spend hours in the backyard helping our son, Sam, build a wobbly catapult for a school project, explaining the physics of ancient siege weapons with infectious glee. His passion project was a small tour company offering historical walks through our New England town. I supported it, of course, allocating a sensible amount from our savings as seed money and helping him structure the books. He was charismatic and knowledgeable, and the tourists adored his dramatic reenactments of colonial skirmishes. But I knew, from the quarterly reports I helped him prepare, that passion didn't always translate to profit. The business was struggling, a small but persistent drain on our otherwise flawless financial ledger, a rounding error I allowed for the sake of his happiness. Our closest friend, Olivia, was a vital part of our balanced world, a sharp, successful financial advisor. She had been my confidant since college and was the godmother to our daughter. Lily. She was woven into the fabric of our family. Just last month, we'd been sitting at my kitchen island, sipping coffee while I reconciled accounts for a client. She'd leaned over my shoulder, pointing at the screen. "You see patterns no one else does. Caroline," she'd said with genuine admiration. "It's your superpower." She was the one I called after a stressful audit, the one who advised Thomas on how to make his small business viable. She fit into our lives so perfectly, another column of assets on my personal balance sheet, her value unquestioned and absolute. The first tremor, the first sign of a hairline crack in my perfectly constructed world, came on a cool autumn evening. We were having dinner on the patio, the three of us, after the kids were in bed, under the soft glow of string lights. Thomas was lamenting a slow tourist season, and Olivia, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, offered her professional opinion. "In any venture, Thomas," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "you have to accept a few sunk costs that can't always be justified on paper. Small, unaccountable expenses you write off for the sake of the bigger return." It was the phrasing that bothered me. A sunk cost is a past expense that can't be recovered. It has nothing to do with unaccountable future spending. It was a subtle misuse of a technical term, the kind of small error a professional like Olivia shouldn't make. Like a surgeon calling a scalpel a butter knife. It was insignificant to anyone else. But to me, it was a data point that didn't fit the pattern. Thomas just nodded, seemingly inspired, but my internal auditor had just flagged a transaction for review. It was a feeling I knew well, the deep, cold hum of a number that didn't add up. A few weeks later, as Thomas's 45th birthday approached, the hum grew louder. He became distant, moody, a variance in the predictable pattern of his behavior. He started working later, claiming he was developing a new Revolutionary War tour. He was more guarded with his phone, angling it away when texts came in. I tried to address it, to put the problem on our shared ledger. "Is the business stress getting to you?" I asked one evening. "We can reevaluate the budget, maybe inject more capital." He just waved it off, saying it was just the pressure of turning 45, the classic male cliché. I decided a quiet weekend away, just the two of us, was the solution, a chance to reconnect and rebalance our emotional accounts. But the night before we were supposed to leave, he dropped his bombshell. We were sitting in the living room, a documentary about the Roman Empire playing softly on the television. He picked up the remote and muted it, the sudden silence feeling heavy and deliberate. He cleared his throat and started talking, not about us, but about history, about men who reached middle age and realized their lives were just a footnote in someone else's story. His words were cloaked in a sort of sad, academic philosophy, a lecture on existential dread. I need a hall pass. Caroline, he said finally, his eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling. Just for my birthday one night. It wouldn't mean anything. It's just something I need to do to feel like I'm still in control of my own story, not just a character in yours. The word control struck me like a physical blow. He was suggesting that my competence, my careful planning, the very stability he depended on, was a cage he needed to escape from. The request was not just an infidelity, it was an indictment of the life I had so carefully built for us. I felt a profound sense of betrayal, but also a sharp, analytical confusion. The risk-reward ratio of his proposal was catastrophic. The potential for loss was total. The potential for gain, non-existent. It was the worst deal I had ever heard. Absolutely not, Thomas, I said, my voice colder than I intended. That is the most illogical, self-destructive idea I have ever heard. Our argument was quiet but brutal. He accused me of seeing him as just another asset to be managed, of scheduling the passion out of our lives. I told him that stability wasn't a prison, it was a privilege, one he clearly didn't appreciate. He eventually backed down, his anger deflating into a pathetic sort of apology, blaming it on a midlife crisis, a moment of stupid panic. Forget I said it, he pleaded. It was a mistake. I wanted to believe him, for the sake of order, for the sake of our children sleeping peacefully upstairs. I wanted to file this conversation away as a temporary write-off, but as we sat in the tense silence, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced over, and my blood ran cold. The screen was lit up with a text preview from Olivia. It read, "Don't worry, we still have other assets we can leverage." Leverage. Assets, in the context of our argument. The words felt sinister, coded. It was business speak being used to cover something deeply personal. The discrepancy I had sensed for weeks had just been given a name. And I knew, with the chilling clarity of a resolved equation, that I had to conduct an audit of my own life. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken words. Thomas made the kids pancakes, acting overly cheerful in a way that set my teeth on edge. He thought his apology had closed the books on the issue. He was wrong. The weekend trip was canceled. I told him a major client had a work emergency. The emergency was my life. As soon as he left with the kids for a Saturday soccer game, I retreated to my home office, closed the door, and began to work. I didn't start by looking for love letters or explicit photos. I started where I always did, with the numbers. I approached our shared finances like a hostile takeover, looking for anomalies. It didn't take long. For years, I had managed our joint accounts, every transaction categorized, every statement reconciled. My trust in him had made my reviews routine. Now, I saw it with fresh eyes, deep within the records of our joint credit card. I found it a recurring monthly payment of $99 to a company I'd never heard of, OV Assets, LLC. It was small enough to be an oversight, a subscription he'd forgotten to cancel, but it had no paper trail. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady on the keyboard. I ran a business search. The company was registered in Delaware, a haven for corporate anonymity, but I had my own tools, professional databases that could pierce the corporate veil. A few queries later, I had the name of the sole proprietor, Olivia. The room tilted. I took a deep breath, pushing down the wave of nausea. Emotion was a liability in an investigation. I needed more data. I worked through the day and into the night, the house silent around me. I dug deeper and found larger transfers from Thomas's business account to OV Assets, labeled consulting fees. The amounts were wildly inconsistent with the revenue his company was generating. He was paying Olivia more than his business was earning. Where was the money coming from? I started pulling our old tax returns, our investment statements, everything. And then I saw the pattern: small, systematic withdrawals from a brokerage account I had set up for the children's college education. It was money I had carefully invested, the product of bonuses I had earned and saved. Thomas had been siphoning money from our children's future and funneling it into Olivia's shell company. The betrayal was so much deeper than an affair. This was a conspiracy. This was fraud. I felt a strange detachment as the personal pain was overshadowed by professional outrage. They had made a fatal mistake. They had tried to defraud an accountant who specialized in finding it. I worked for 48 hours straight, fueled by black coffee and a grim, burning focus. I traced the money from OV assets. It wasn't being reinvested. It was being spent on lavish dinners at restaurants I'd only read about, weekend getaways to boutique hotels, expensive gifts. At one point, I had to stop, my head in my hands. As I stared at a receipt from a spa day for two, I remembered Thomas telling me we couldn't afford a weekend away because his business was so tight. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. And then I found the final damning transaction, a charge for $50,000 at a Cartier boutique in New York, paid by the OV Assets credit card. The date matched a history teachers' conference Thomas had supposedly attended alone. I printed the statement. I printed the bank records. I printed the phony expense report Thomas had submitted for his New York trip. I compiled everything into a single dense file. It was a perfect, irrefutable audit trail of their deception. The next day, I sent a concise text to both Thomas and Olivia. I need to see you both. My office, 7 p.m. It's an urgent financial matter. They arrived separately, looking nervous but trying to appear casual. Thomas brought me a cup of coffee, an awkward peace offering which I left untouched. Olivia asked if everything was all right with my portfolio, her professional mask firmly in place. They sat in the two leather chairs facing my desk, the same chairs where I met with clients. They still thought this was about Thomas's struggling business. They had no idea they were walking into a final judgment. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of my computer. Then, I slid a thick, professionally bound document across the polished surface of my desk. The cover page read, in stark black letters, Forensic Audit and Findings of Assets, LLC. I watched the color drain from their faces as they read the title. As Olivia's professional composure fractured, her hand instinctively went to her throat. My eyes followed the movement. Glimmering against her skin was a new, impossibly brilliant diamond necklace. My final exhibit. I didn't speak. I simply opened the report to the first tab, a flowchart detailing the movement of money from our children's college fund, through Thomas's business, into their shell company. I walked them through it, my voice even and dispassionate, as if I were presenting to a corporate board with every page. Their pathetic attempts at denial crumbled into silence. Finally, I turned to the last page. It was a high-resolution copy of the $50,000 charge from Cartier. I placed it in the center of the desk and then looked pointedly at the necklace Olivia was wearing. "This was my children's money," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You wore their education around your neck." That was when Olivia finally broke, a small sob escaping her lips. Thomas just looked hollowed out, a ghost in the ruins of the life he had set on fire. I let them sit in their shame for a full minute. The audit was complete. It was time for the final accounting. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out two folders. "You have two options," I began. "Folder number 1 contains divorce papers, Thomas. You will agree to my terms without contest. You will forfeit your claim to this house and to 70% of our shared liquid assets. Your access to the children will be supervised until a therapist deems you fit. Olivia." It also contains a settlement agreement. You will repay every cent you helped steal, with interest, within 30 days. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate sliver of hope, flickered to the second folder. "Folder number 2, I continued, tapping it with my finger, contains a finalized copy of this audit report, along with a whistleblower complaint I have prepared. If you do not agree to the terms in the first folder, I will be sending this one to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS tomorrow morning. Your other clients, Olivia, will be very interested in your investment strategies." I leaned back in my chair. "You will sign folder number 1 now," I said, "or I will mail folder number 2. The meeting is over." They signed, their hands trembling as they scribbled their signatures on the documents that dismantled their lives. They didn't speak another word. After they left, I sat alone in my office until the sun came up, the silence a heavy blanket. There was no triumph, no joy, just the cold. Clean satisfaction of a ledger finally, perfectly balanced. The months that followed were an exercise in methodical reconstruction. The first difficult conversation was with my children. I sat them down and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that Dad and I would be living in different houses, but that we both loved them very much. There were tears and confusion, and my heart ached with every question I couldn't fully answer. But I held them close and promised them they were safe. I sold the house that held too many ghosts and moved with the children into a sleek city apartment with a floor-to-ceiling view of the skyline. I left my corporate job and, with the capital I had secured in the divorce, I opened my own boutique firm, Moreland Forensic Audits. My reputation, built on a foundation of unshakable integrity, preceded me. Clients came, cases of complex financial deception that other firms couldn't crack. I found I was not just good at it, I was brilliant. I was reclaiming my own value, one decimal point at a time. Thomas faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered among the faculty at his school. I saw him once at a grocery store. He looked older, tired, and he fumbled with his coupons at the checkout line. He saw me, and for a moment, there was a flicker of the man I once knew, a look of profound regret. I just gave him a small, neutral nod and continued on with my shopping. He was a past-due account that had been written off. Olivia's career was over. The settlement she paid me forced her to liquidate everything, and whispers of her methods spread like wildfire through the financial community. Their punishment was not a dramatic, fiery revenge, but the slow, quiet erosion of everything they had built on lies. My life, on the other hand, began to grow, free from the weight of their treachery. I thrived. My firm became a leader in the field. I was invited to speak at conferences, to lecture at universities. I was building a new life, not on the ruins of the old one, but on a fresh, clean foundation that was entirely my own. I found joy in the small things, helping Lily with her geometry homework, watching Sam score a goal in his soccer game, the quiet satisfaction of closing a difficult case for a grateful client. 2 years later, I stood on the stage of a grand auditorium, the keynote speaker at a national conference on business ethics. I looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of professionals hanging on my every word. I spoke about the patterns of deception, the red flags, the importance of trusting the data above all else. During the Quanda, a young woman in the front row asked me what the single most important lesson of my career had been. I smiled, a real unburdened smile. The most important lesson, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity I had earned, is that numbers never lie. People do. And your only job, is to trust the numbers. The applause was deafening as I stood there, soaking in the moment. My eyes scanned the crowd, and for a fleeting second I saw him near the back, half hidden in the shadows, was a man who looked older, smaller, and deeply tired. It was Thomas. Our eyes met. There was no anger in his gaze, no plea for forgiveness. There was only the dull, resigned acceptance of a man looking at a world he no longer belonged to. I gave a slight, impersonal nod, the kind one gives to a stranger, and turned back to the light. The books on that chapter of my life had been closed, audited, and filed away for good.